Longevity, check. Games played, games started, check. Ability, check. He fits all the boxes.
In the NFL, it's hard to check the box every day. But center Brad Meester did it during his entire 14-year career.
You think of Brad Meester, you think of longevity. 209 career games, the most by any player in franchise history.
I would call him a classic lunch pail guy. Came to work every day, gave it everything he had.
If they needed him to play guard, he was a guard. If they needed him to play center, he was a center. If they needed him to play quick and get up the field, he was quick and up the field. If they needed him to maul, he mauled.
Yeah, Mr. Jaguar, and to show you how long Brad was here, Brad was here when I first covered the team, and decades later he was still here. It still felt like decades. When I walked in 10 years later after covering the team and Brad Meester was still here playing at a high level, it was like, wow, time really does stand still sometimes.
During Meester's time in Jacksonville, he set team records for seasons played, games played and started, and consecutive games started. To play in that many games in the NFL, you have to be pretty good at your job.
Takes the snap. Now he's going to run. Byron's going up the middle. Touchdown!
I mean, he was in there game after game, year after year. You could always just depend on him.
They drafted him as a guard in 2000, but he goes in as center in 2001. This franchise didn't draft a center until 2014. They went 13 years without even trying to address the position.
You know, he realized that he wasn't just the guy that touched the ball in every play. He was the heartbeat of that offensive line.
Meester played under 4 head coaches and protected 9 starting quarterbacks during his career. He is known as Mr. Jaguar, and he has seen just about every era of football in Jacksonville.
Didn't get much notice, but that never seemed to, bother him. A real team leader, the head of the offense, and he played 14 years with the same team and went out on his own terms.
Tell you what he is. He's a Pro Bowl and All-Pro father, mostly because he has 7 daughters. That guy gets the All-Pro, All-World, All-Everything title.
This week on the Coaching Culture Podcast, we are pleased to be joined by my friend and colleague from Mount Vernon High School, Brad Meester. Now, Brad is a former NFL veteran, played 14 years in the league, all for the Jacksonville Jaguars on the offensive line. And this week, in part 1 of our conversation, we're going to talk to him a little bit about his playing experiences going all the way back to his days in high school, playing for legendary Iowa high school football coach Ed Thomas, and how the impact of Coach Thomas continues to affect his approach and his own coaching philosophy today. You're listening to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is Nate Sanderson, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host JP Nurbin. The podcast is brought to you by TOC Culture Consulting. Visit thriveonchallenge.com to sign up for our weekly newsletter, where you can get access to the podcast notes as well as a weekly article written by JP or myself talking about practical ways that you can improve your leadership and culture. Now let's get into our conversation with Brad Meester. Brad, I think we're going to kind of take you all the way back to start here, and maybe just talk a little bit about what your high school experience was like, playing for maybe one of the most transformational coaches in our state's history, in Coach Thomas.
He had such a huge impact, on my life, my career, things like that. And it was just, the life lessons that he taught during the game of football. He had so many great things, and one of the things that he always said is, if all I was taught you is the X's and O's, then, I failed as a coach. It was about life lessons. There were so many things, it was all about building character. He was building men of character. There's so many things, but just with the pride in what we do, taking pride in everything that we did on and off the field, and about doing the right thing. It was always about doing the right thing all the time. And I remember every time I met him, when I went to Jacksonville, every time I came back and saw him, he never started the conversation with football. He never started it with what was going on with the Jaguars or anything like that. He asked about my family, asked how my family was doing. It was about how we was as a family. And one of the things that he always talked to us about and talked to me about is never forgetting where we came from. You know, all the guys that went to the NFL, it was about never forgetting where we came from. And it was just really just about, you know, that character, that lifestyle that we were brought up with, that, you know, being humble and pride in what we do, no matter where we go, not, you know, not transforming and becoming like them, but just remembering who we are. I mean, it was about how we were brought up, how we were raised, and taking that wherever we go. And he always preached that to us, just to remember where we came from. And I thought that was huge because it is easy sometimes when you go somewhere else just to kind of to fit in, you know, sometimes because you're absolutely new in places, you know, you just try to fit in, and sometimes you just try to do what they do. But just knowing who I was, that wasn't going to change. Remember where I was from, how I was raised, and just always staying true to that was huge. And that was, I mean, a lot of that came from him. You know, it was just constantly preaching to us that stuff and about, you know, obviously on the field, just working hard, taking pride in what we do. But it was more than just about what we did on the field. It was taking that out into life. And, you know, he had a huge part of that.
Sounds like he had a really great impact through the relationship that he had with you, you know, that personal relationship beyond, you know, Brad, the football player. And, you know, I could tell that for sure. So I'm kind of curious next, you know, when it came to the culture that he created and the way that he acted on the football field as a leader, I'm just kind of curious what that experience was like. What was that football locker room like? You know, what was it like experiencing his coaching on the football field?
It was awesome. You know, I thought one of the big things and why our culture was so good was he didn't treat me any different than he treated, you know, anybody else. You know what I mean? He expected the same thing out of everyone. And when you go back and you talk to guys that played for him, and some of them didn't even step on the field, but they still got the same life lessons that that an all-stater did for him, because he treated each and every one the exact same. And it was one of those cultures for me and for everybody that was there. You know, he led. Obviously, he was, you know, a disciplined type of guy. You know, hard nosed. But it wasn't a fear of playing for him or you were intimidated. I just didn't want to let him down. Like I really respected him, and I think everybody that played for him had the utmost respect for him. And I didn't want to let him down. I wanted to make sure that I gave everything I had each time I went out there, whether it was on the field or in life, or just, you know, as a high school kid out there every day, whether I was in school or, you know, out on the weekend with my friends. Almost like, I mean, almost like a parent figure. I just didn't want to let him down. You know, I mean, I wanted to do my best. I took great pride in what I wanted to do or what we did. And I think that's the way that culture was there. You know, we didn't want to let him down, and we didn't want to let each other down. It was that cohesive group that just bonded. And that's the way that culture was there.
I think one of the things that I've learned about Appleton Parkersburg as a community is that the football culture for a long, long time was so interwoven into the experience of the community. You know, and obviously the signature story is the F5 tornado, you know, that came through and did all that damage, and how it wasn't just Coach Thomas, but he kind of spearheaded all kinds of volunteerism, you know, which I don't think was unique. You know, it seemed like that was sort of everybody else's perception, you know, was at that moment was like, oh, the football team and everyone's come together to help rebuild the community. But I get the sense in talking to Aaron, his son, and others there, that was something that was expected all the time, was this idea that we have a responsibility to the community off the field as well. I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
Yeah, I mean, that when you look back at like that F5 tornado that tore up, you know, half the town, they didn't bat an eye. I mean, there was that sense of community, and obviously Coach Thomas spearheaded a lot of that. I mean, a lot of those people in that town had played for him, or there was just that utmost respect, like I talked about. But yeah, he just kind of spearheaded, and everybody just rallied around each other. It was people helping each other. I remember seeing pictures and videos of instantly after it happened, I mean, they were out there, I mean, working, cleaning up. I mean, Coach Thomas was on the field picking up stuff that was, on the field, and they just went right to work and helped each other. I mean, it was a group that just did everything they could for each other, because I know there was a lot of people that, there were quite a few of them, they didn't have homes because obviously they were destroyed in the tornado. And you could see like the other half of the town, because it went through half the town, were taking people in. They were out there helping them, but they were taking them in and they were staying there. I know my in-laws, their house was destroyed in the tornado. They stayed at my parents' house for several weeks while they tried to find some place to stay. And that's just the way that community was. And a lot of that, Coach Thomas spearheaded a lot of that. Obviously, he was the leader of that but it was just that close-knit community all around.
I want to transition a little bit here and kind of jump ahead on your timeline to some of your experiences in the NFL. You played for 4 different head coaches in 14 seasons at Jacksonville: Tom Coughlin, Jack Del Rio, Mike Mularkey for a year, and Gus Bradley. I'm just curious, generally speaking, when you've experienced a number of excellent coaches at every level that you've been at, what are some things that have impacted your coaching philosophy today in your work as the offensive coordinator at Mount Vernon that you've maybe taken from some of those coaches along the way?
Yeah, so I had 4 coaches, and all were, I don't want to say drastically different, but they were all very different. They really were. Coach Coughlin was a very, strict, disciplined type of guy. And for me, that was something I was very used to anyway. Had that my entire career. It was one of those that if the meeting started at 8, it actually started at like 7:55. You needed to be 5 minutes early or you were late. And there was no breaking of the rules. But I love that. I mean, it was a very, it was black and white. There was a fine, you knew what was expected always. And he didn't beat around the bush, anything like that. He always told you the exact truth, whether you like to hear it or not. He told you the truth. And I like that. I mean, I just like that. I mean, I knew where he was. I knew what he expected. And so that helped me a lot. And then, you fast forward, Jack Del Rio was, more of was much more laid back. And just, I don't know, it was a laid back, relaxed atmosphere where it was a close knit group. And then we moved on to Mike Mularkey, which he was big into just giving everything he got out there, finishing, you know what I mean? And we moved, he was there for 1 year. And then my final year I had Gus Bradley, and Gus Bradley was tremendous. He was absolutely awesome. And it was just about loving the game and having fun. I mean, that's what it all was about. Was just, we get it obviously at that level, it's a job, but it was about enjoying the game of football. It's a game. And we just went out and had fun. And it was, he brought a great atmosphere to the locker room. He really did. And to that group that just, we just went out there as one group, one family, and played together and rallied around each other.
Football in the NFL it's $1 billion business. There's this business aspect of it. Hard decisions are made. People come, people go. People are, trying to make their mark in the league. And at the same time, you're trying to create this team culture, where people want to be, sacrificing each other. And that's got to be a little bit different when you move from the high school level to the college level, then to obviously the professional level. So what could you share with coaches out there, regardless of their level, that you felt was like effective at developing that cohesive type culture that you talked about, that, Jack Del Rio, really was able to create there at the Jaguars, and maybe some of your other experiences as well?
Yeah, it is different, obviously, because a lot of people come and go, and we learned that early on, because I wasn't used to that. Because we would build close relationships with people. My wife and I would build close relationships with people on and off the field. Then all of a sudden, a year or two later, they're gone. And you don't see them. And then it's a whole new group, and it changes quickly, especially when you go through coaching changes. The roster changes really fast. But I think, to build that cohesive group, I mean, obviously it's a job, and we know it's a job. I mean, that's our profession. But in that locker room, we know that we're each human beings. You know what I mean? We're as normal as anybody else, and we're all out there for that same cause. You know what I mean? Obviously, we want to be able to get together as a group, and just bond. And obviously, we want to win games. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're there to do, is win games. But it's much more than that. I mean, like I said, we're human beings in the locker room, and people make mistakes, and we realize that. Sometimes all you see is the people on TV and stuff like that. But when you're in that there's just something about being in that locker room with that group. I think that's where that bond is made, is in that locker room, because we have real conversations. It's guys. Some of my closest relationships were not necessarily with linemen. It was several relationships with kickers that we just bonded. But it was just locker room. It was talking and realize how similar you are, your families, things like that. We all realize that nobody's perfect in that locker room, and we're just each there for each other. So if a guy, listen, we all make mistakes. We make mistakes in the game. I've had plenty of them, but I think one of the great things is that in that locker room, we all realize that, that none of us are perfect. And when somebody made a mistake, it wasn't us, yelling at them and getting mad at them. It was just helping them out, trying to make them better, because we all do the same thing.
So one of the challenges, many of the coaches that we work with, especially in football, is this challenge of this, especially in football, it's this hyper masculine culture. A lot of, guys really trying to be macho, and just some of those issues there that can be pretty brutal at times. What was that experience like for you? Because it sounds, telling us some of the good stuff there. Did you encounter that? If you encounter that, how'd you work through that? Or is that?
Obviously, football, there's a lot of it that you have to be tough, and you got to get after it and be me and all this other stuff. But like I said, a lot of times, when we're sitting there talking, we're real people. We really are. With real feelings. And one of those big things is we talk to a lot to our kids, our high school kids, to not be afraid to share their feelings. We all talk about it. We talk about the words love, things like that, love, tough love, things like that. And that's okay to talk about. It's okay to, to share and things like that. It's okay to share emotions. And there are a lot of times things like that happen in the locker room. I know a lot of times you get that persona of, these guys are tough. You see what's on TV, tough, getting after it, stuff like that. But, there's so many times that, we share emotions in the locker room. People get emotional. They get they cry, they get upset. It affects people. I had several times that happened to me, where it really affects you. I had a situation where it really shook me a little bit, where I affected the end of the game, where I missnapped it. It's one of those things, and it was a 2-minute drive, and it cost us. I completely messed up. I thought I heard something. I snapped the ball early, and it affected the game, and it shook me in the locker room, because it meant a lot to me. I don't ever want to let our team down, and at that moment, I felt like it, that I had let them down, and I sat in my locker, and I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just was out of it, and the guys rallied right around me. Didn't affect any of them. They were right there for me, picked me up, helped me out. The relationships and bonds that I built with people in high school, college, and in the NFL are guys that I still rely on. Those are guys I still talk to all the time, and share things with. Those were relationships that were built in the locker.
So much of that camaraderie, regardless of level, I know this as high school coaches, and it's the same as you go up the ladder, is often determined by your team leaders. And, 14 years in the NFL, I'm just curious, who were some of the best team leaders, that you were around in some of those Jacksonville locker rooms?
I always look at some of the guys early on. I really do. I think some of the great leaders for me were guys, and I realize leaders are guys that have to, they speak up and say something, they're the vocal guys. But I think it's not necessarily being the vocal guy all the time. You know what I mean? I think it's being the vocal guy when it's important. When someone needs to stand up and say something. Because those guys, when they say something at the right times, you take attention to it. You know what I mean? I've had guys that would come in and they had something to say like every day, all the time, and then it almost, I don't say it drowns out after a while, but it's like, here we go again. But it's those guys that when something needs to be said, they say it. You know what I mean? But at the same time, they're down to earth guys that are there for you all the time. They're real. I think that's one of the big things. You know, they say stuff when stuff needs to be said, but at the same time, they're real. You know what I mean? They're not afraid to have real conversations with you. Early on in my career, I think some of those guys that really had an impact leadership wise were guys like Tony Baselli and Mark Brunell, you know, guys like that, Todd Fordham, guys that were in that locker room because, you know, if something happened, like Tony Baselli was going to say something. You know what I mean, he didn't say stuff all the time, but if something was wrong, it was getting said and you listened to it. If something, you know, and it wasn't just in the locker room, it was on the field. If something happened, he was going to do something about it. You know what I mean? And I remember middle of game, somebody hit Mark Brunell, our quarterback, and he did something about it. Like he was standing up for it. This isn't right. You know, he got after it. So it was guys like that I followed. But on that same page, you know, guys like that stand up in the locker room, do all this other stuff, but they were just as real outside of that locker room. We were out in the community, things like that. I remember being a rookie. I mean, I had just gotten there literally in July, things like that. I didn't know anybody. I'm stuck in an extended stay hotel, you know, I have no car. So I'm literally just stuck there. And, you know, you don't have smartphones, you don't have anything. I got a flip phone probably at that time, you know what I mean? So there's not a lot to do. But guys like that, leaders like that would come get us at the extended stay, literally would pick us up and take us out. They would take us, and true story, I mean, they would on Sundays, I mean, they were religious, would take us to church on Sunday mornings. They asked, hey, you guys want to come with us to church on Sunday mornings? And we say, yeah, we'd love to. I mean, that's being a leader. It's not just yelling and, you know, saying, hey, this is what we got to do, you know, when it on the field or in the locker room. It was just being real people, saying stuff when stuff needed to be said. Like if something's not right, they were saying it, but they were just real people, down to earth people that really were looking out for your best interest at all times, trying to figure out, hey, do you need something? Need help with something? Do you need us to take you to church on a Sunday or take you somewhere? Those are guys that, for me, I followed because, I mean, I knew that they cared. I mean, they wanted what was best for the team, and you knew they cared genuinely about you and making sure that you were okay.
That's interesting you share that, because one of my questions I wanted to ask you was, you know, being in the locker room all those years, longer than any other Jag before. My question for you is, how did you influence the locker room? You know, especially through so many, you know, coaching changes and just as the franchise moved forward and went through ups and downs. Like, how were you an influence and leader?
I think mine was very similar. I think I learned from them. I mean, I was not, I'm not afraid to admit it, I was not a super vocal guy. I was not, you know what I mean? I really felt there's so many different types of being a leader, but really mine was doing the right thing every day. I was going to give you everything I had every day, and really just leading by example. You know what I mean? I wasn't yelling and screaming every day. I wasn't saying, hey, you need to do this or we need to do that. I was just I was leading by example. Now, if something was wrong and it needed to be said, it was said. I led by my actions. I mean, what I did each and every day, and really just trying to help, just like they did for me. You know, guys like Baselli and Brunell and those guys, what they did for me, you know, outside the locker room, I try to do that with the other guys. If they needed help with something, I wanted to make sure I was there for them. I know through my career, there were several guys that, you know, that struggled, you know, they're on the cusp of getting cut, you know what I mean? They're borderline guys that were just trying to figure out our offense and stuff like that. And there were a lot of times I just sat down with them after practice. You know, I mean, we would be there from, I think meetings started like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, depending if we lifted, all the way till 5. And I remember a lot of times sitting down in our meetings rooms afterwards for an hour, 2 hours if I had to, and try to explain the offense to them and our blocking and different things like that, just to try to help them out. And just doing stuff like that. I mean, those are guys I still talk to today.
You retired, I believe it was 2013, and that transition from high level athlete to normal guy, right? That's a tough transition, I think, for any athlete, regardless of their level, when they have so much of our identity gets caught up in our sport naturally, because it's the thing that we've done every single day for really your entire life. So how did you manage that transition? Because I know so many athletes that struggle with that.
Yeah, that transition can be hard. I think one of the things that helped me a little bit was, obviously, I knew that transition was coming. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it was thrown on me in year 7 where they said, hey, you're done. You know what I mean? You ain't playing anymore. I knew it was coming. You know what I mean? I'd gotten to that point. And I think one of the things that I thought really helped me, I had a great conversation with Jimmy Smith, our wide receiver. He had retired. He had been done for several years. I met him at, Tom Coughlin had this foundation. He has this foundation. So it was a charity event, and I was sitting there talking with him. And one of the things he talked about was just having something to transition into doing. I mean, have something you want to do after you're done retired. After you retire, you know what I mean? What is it you want to do? And so that was one of the big things I think that helped me. Because when I got done playing, I went back to school. I said, I got to do something. I want to do something with my life. I got to have some type of direction with it. I actually went back to school. I went to a motorcycle school in Daytona, Florida. So I learned how, because I love motorcycles. I love fixing things. I went to a bike school, learned how to fix old Harleys. So when we moved back to Iowa here, this is what I ended up doing. I just sat in my shop fixing Harleys, fixing motorcycles. It just gave me a purpose, gave me something to do. And right along with that, I think the other thing that I realized, obviously having kids, having, stuff like, having kids, having a family, I was realizing that football was not who I was. You know what I mean? Football is not my identity. It's what I did. It's my job. Did it for a long time. But that's not who I am. I mean, who I am is, I love my family. I love doing stuff with my family. I want to be there with my kids. Christian. I want to help people. I want to do different things. That's who I am. My family, things that I do in the community, things like that. It's not the X's and O's of football. That was what I did, but it's not who I am. And just understanding that, and understanding that it was going to come to an end at some point. It does for all of us. When it came to an end, it was just a transition period. Now I'm on to the next stage of my life.
I appreciate you sharing that. There's not many of our listeners are NFL players, but there are coaches. And I think that's a coaching struggle, that we tie so much of our identity to that job so often. But you're also mentioning something around family, which I think that's an important piece into this equation for coaches that I think you could potentially speak to. And this is this concept of, I'm sure your profession, while some days at some points it's probably cool, hey, my dad plays in the NFL, it's not something that they particularly usually enjoy that often, is what I've heard from, professional athletes' children. And it's the same as, coaches' children, our kids don't enjoy the fact that we coach and we're gone all the time. And, we have to, hear people criticize us and, the media are out there. So it's a real challenge on families. So I'm just kind of curious, what was that experience like, kind of as you made that transition, and were your kids excited about that? And did that play into some of the factor about when to retire?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they realized that time, my younger ones didn't, but my older ones realized that it was my job. And they just, I don't want to say they accepted it, but I mean, it is hard. I mean, sometimes I didn't realize it at the time, how hard it is and how much I'm gone and how much of stuff I missed. But I think the big thing for me, even now, is, and it's hard, is that word balance, and it's just finding a balance between all of it. So I think especially now that I've got into coaching, and it's, it is a continual struggle, and it's a trying to work at it and getting better at it is balancing everything that happens, in my life and in each of our lives. So one of the things, that I've tried to do now that I'm coaching is saying, hey, I'm going to try, even high school football, it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of video you got to watch, just scheming stuff, different things like that. I try to do that stuff. I don't want to say away from them, but a lot of times what I end up doing is I'll wake up super early in the morning and try to do it while they're still sleeping, because I don't want to take that time away from them. Or after they go to bed, a lot of times I'll stay up later at night, try to do that stuff during that time. That way, while they're at home, while they're here, I can have quality time with them. And really, one of the great things, and I'm very appreciative of Coach Peterson, Lance Peterson, and, it's just that flexibility, because there's a lot of times that I want to be able to go watch my kids play. Like right now, they're playing volleyball or it's basketball or whatever it is at that time of year. But right now, they're playing volleyball. Well, there's several times that I've had to miss practice. I just say, hey, can I miss practice to go watch my kid, play volleyball? And he's absolutely, without question. That's what I love, be able to do that, be able to put that family first. So I think obviously the big thing with all of it is just finding that balance, making it work. And sometimes it's hard, like getting up super early in the morning is hard to do, to sit here and watch film and do all this when I think, I could do this during the day, but just realizing a family comes first, and that's one of the big things going back to Coach Thomas again. He always talked to us about the order, our 3 F's was our faith, our family, and football. Football was the last of those 3, and putting those other 2 first. When you put them in that order, they work. You're able to have time. But if you put football at the very top of it, they just don't work together. So just finding that time, making everything balanced, has been a big thing for me.
Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Coaching Culture Podcast. If you haven't already, visit thriveonchallenge.com to sign up for our weekly newsletter. And if you're interested in talking to JP or myself about any ways that we can help support you as you grow in your leadership and try to grow the culture of your program, please feel free to reach out. Our contact information is in the show notes as well as on the website. And be sure to join us next week as we dive into part 2 of our conversation with Brad Meester as we discuss his transition from the NFL back into the real world and his current role as a girl dad and high school football coach.